Bem-vindos, bem-vindas, bem-vindes ao nosso evento Martius Revisitado 2, Sustentabilidade em Tempos de Urbanismos do Sul, da Cidade do México a São Paulo. Welcome to all of you. This event will be in English, but we are also recording this event, so we will later upload it to YouTube, and then those of you who are assisting online can also put the subtitles in Portuguese. We won't have subtitles today, so please bear with us, but also for the discussion, I think we can also do a less formal way, and if you want to say something in Portuguese, please feel free, and we can translate and assist and so on, yeah? So welcome to our symposium, Martius Revisited. Number 2, I will expand in a second, Sustainability in Times of Southern Urbanism, from Mexico City to São Paulo. And it is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Diane Davis and Professor Fraya Frehse, who will be our keynote speakers today, Frank Müller, who will be our moderator today, and we will introduce you all in a second. I just wanted to explain quickly to you the proposal for this symposium, how we come to this, why is it called Martius Revisited 2, and to explain a little bit also why we think it will be particularly interesting to discuss this theme with our keynote speakers today. So this symposium proposes a revisiting of the conceptual and the empirical discussions that inspired the establishment of the DAAD, German Academic Exchange Service, Martius Chair, Germany-Brazil for Humanities and Sustainability. So the proposal of this chair is to revisit or to discuss sustainability from an interdisciplinary perspective based at the Faculty for Philosophy, Languages and Literature and Human Sciences at the University of São Paulo. So you see, the chair is already based at quite an interdisciplinary faculty, and this is from where we come with our proposal. This event is called Martius Revisited 2 because we already did one event, and we will do a third event in this semester to revisit not only the theme of the chair, but also revisit in a way the proposals that are behind, the propositions that are behind this theme. So in Martius 1, we reassess the legacy of European ecological thinking in light of contemporary nature-culture debates. So basically, we revisited Martius, Carl Friedrich Philipp von Martius, who gave the name to this chair, who was a botanist, a German botanist who traveled to Brazil and is very influential until today for Brazilian botany, but also for other disciplines like anthropology, history, and humanities in general. At Martius Revisited number 3, we will be revisiting the debate around global health in an age of the planetary. And today we revisit sustainability in times of southern urbanism. Particularly today we want to discuss the role of southern cities in the search for new conceptual and empirical answers to the past, present and future of sustainable urbanization. And we are very happy to welcome Professor Diane E. Davis from Harvard University and Professor Fraya Frehse from University of São Paulo, who both from their long research engagement with the South American megacities, Mexico City and São Paulo, will present us with the southern city, in inverted commas, as a space-time of conflicting nature-culture relations that can be traced back to modernist planning paradigms and post-colonial orderings and rhythms of the city. So Frank Müller and I have been inviting our speakers to reflect on the visibility and on the invisibility of agents as much as elements sustaining the urban environment nexus, from everyday practices and knowledges of homeless people in their interaction with multispecies São Paulo to the unruly agencies and conflicting spatial imaginaries of land and water in Mexico City. This symposium problematizes contemporary theories and politics of urban sustainability. So again, I'm very glad to have you all here, and I will hand over now to Dr. Frank Müller, who works on urban housing, on violence, and on governance in cities of the South, from Mexico over Rio de Janeiro and Medellin, to recently also the region of the greater state of São Paulo. And in 2025, he will be a Humboldt Fellow to work on a project about toxic landscapes in the Baixada Santista. And he will be hosted by Fraya Frehse at the FFLCH at the faculty here at University of São Paulo. So the floor is yours, Frank, to introduce Diane, and then I welcome you to our first keynote. Sorry, Frank, I completely forgot to show the program. We can do it together, sorry. So I just need to show the next slide. I just wanted to quickly tell you what we're doing today. Sorry. So we have a first keynote by Professor Diane Davis in a second, followed by a quick Q&A, so you can already ask some questions, right? Some burning questions you have after the presentation. Then we will have the second keynote by Professor Fraya Frehse. And then we have a quick coffee break, and then we enter into a discussion. So we really invite you to already start thinking about your questions you want to ask to the two presenters, and questions you also want to discuss with us when we start our roundtable on what can and must we learn from resurfacing elements and invisibilized actors for urban sustainability challenges. Thank you so much. Now you can go.
Okay, thank you, Laura. This is working, yes, I guess. Yes, so it's, can you hear me this way? That's okay? Yes, okay. Diane, this is another wonderful opportunity to speak about you and your work. We had the pleasure before in Amsterdam and in Harvard. I will come to this. So let me introduce Diane Davis. Diane Davis is Professor Charles Diane Norton Professor of Regional Planning and Urbanism at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. Diane is trained as a social scientist, basically mostly in sociology, and she has been working mostly on urban governance in cities of the global south, on planning, but now she is more and more moving her research interests towards also work on sustainability, climate crisis, and ecological questions more generally. I will not introduce you into all the publications that Diana has on her list, an impressive, immense list of, okay, maybe this way. Hello. Ah. Yeah, I can also hold it. Okay. So I invite you to check publication lists on their faculty webpage at Harvard. But I just wanted to mention that I think it was your dissertation, Urban Leviathan on Mexico City, was super influential on my personal dissertation, also in Mexico City, where she looks at cities not only as, let's say, spaces, confined spaces, but always as spaces of power and materializations of power in larger global processes. So she's really taking this urban perspective in the global and transnational dimensions and processes. And this was super influential. But then when you see her publication list, she's really moving towards these questions on sustainability, working now on sustainability development goal 11, on cities and communities, and in various contexts. So this is a really great pleasure to see this development also towards the interest that we are sharing here now on urban sustainability. And I think this is just the start of a longer dialogue and conversation between these megacities or megalopolis, or whatever you call it, São Paulo and Mexico City. So let me say one last word. I had the pleasure to work at Harvard 22-23, was here on thinking about ecological sovereignty and the way that contemporary governments are more and more also challenged by processes that we can hardly control. Climate crisis, which really puts into danger also the understandings of national sovereignty, when you actually see that there are forces that might be so uncontrollable that we are challenged, that we really have to rethink our institutions that, as you say, are institutions from the 19th century, maybe not even adequate to confront today's crisis. So, Diane, please, is your stage. I'll be here with you to pass on the slides, and then, as Leah said, we'll have a quick Q&A after your talk.
Should we move that over? Maybe if I'm the other side, I want to sit over there. Yeah, I think it is easier. I see. Yes, that will this count.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you, Frank, for that introduction. And I always love it when people refer to one of the first major works that I did, even though I've like moved in other directions. I still cannot keep myself away from studying Mexico City, which, I mean, I don't want to start a competition with Sao Paulo, but maybe the most interesting city in the world, but maybe that's what we'll talk about later. Sao Paulo and Mexico City are vying for each other's attention and importance within their nations and within the global economy. But thanks for mentioning my work on. I am very much indeed interested in sovereignty and governance, and hopefully that will come through in this presentation, which will be focusing on different imaginaries linked to different sovereigns about Mexico City. But let me first, before I get into my presentation, and also please, Frank, can you hear me? Tell me when I have 10 minutes left. Yeah, you're right, exactly, because we want to have time for Q&A, and I have a lot of slides. I want to thank Laura and the Martius Fellowship, in addition to Frank and all the people, Fraya, who I have had an opportunity to get to know and getting to know better, for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I'm hoping to come back to Sao Paulo sometime within the next 6 months to continue the conversation that we start today. So my presentation is, I want to first give some acknowledgement of this work is a more recent iteration of a project that I had started, that what really was the idea of a doctoral student that I have at the GSD Landscape Architect. Her name is Johanna Kaufman. We have presented a version of a paper that was circulated in another conference. Although I'm embellishing this PowerPoint myself, a lot of the work and a lot of the thinking has been developed in collaboration with Johanna, and I want to acknowledge that. So what I wanted to do, let me just pick up the theme a little bit as a preface that Laura mentioned about the Martius, thinking about past, present, and future. I'm involved in another project funded by an organization called CFAR. It's a small group of urban scholars that are looking at 6 cities around the world. One is Mexico City. And one of our challenges is to think about not just, we have, as a phrase I use, it's kind of an embarrassingly immodest title, Humanities Urban Future. But one of the things we're looking at in that group, is how the past writes itself on the present and future. And and my own work on Mexico City, that book Urban Leviathan, was a historical analysis. This is also a historical analysis, but in order to help us think reflectively about the relationships or the meshing or enmeshing, or the kind of fragmentation of ideas from past, present, and future. So the thematic that Laura underscored is very much embedded in this presentation, and hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to Fraya about that afterwards. So the title of the talk, The Invisibilization of Nature, Power Assemblages, and the Production of an Ecologically Unsustainable Metropolis, is really my attempt to try to understand how images, imaginaries, historically produced, have created the physicality, the built environment of Mexico City. The concept we're using in this paper that I'm trying to develop in this presentation is to think about how taking seriously the variety, the pluralists, the multiplicity of spatial imaginaries reveals something new about cities. So that's why I'm titling this Spatial Imaginaries, and a reference to my dissertation advisor, Manuel Castell's The Urban Question, how we might think about cities differently if we think about spatial imaginaries differently. Obviously, this is a general concept that we could apply to many different cities, and I think I'll talk with Fraya about that later. This is just a definition of what we mean by spatial imaginaries as shared stories and ways of presenting places and spaces. Maybe drawing on Ileana on the digital humanities and other things, but thinking more seriously as scholars. And I do want to say that I'm a social scientist, as Frank underscored, embedded in a design school in a program in urban planning and design. So I'm in conversation with people, policymakers, practitioners, activists, occasionally as well, who are actually interested in remaking cities, remaking them better. But this idea of where do spatial managers fit in those struggles is kind of a theme that is central in my presentation. Now, I want to say that in general, my focus in this presentation is on water, because again, I'm moving into the ecological questions, and I am thinking in the context of this, my CFAR grant, and even Mexico City, new territorialities of governance, because ecological changes, again, that Frank referred to my phrase of 19th centuries are not up to the task of 21st century problems. But in a way, to think about imaginaries is also to think a little bit about the past, present, and possibly future territorialities of governance. Because governing, this is what I mean by 19th century institutions. Most of the institutions that are set in place to govern ecological conditions, whether it's Sao Paulo, Mexico, United States, another place I've studied is India, all happen to be federal systems. But these institutions, what decisions the nations make, what decisions the state make, what the decisions the municipality makes, were set at a different ecological time and a different political time and a different historical time. So in particular, when you're talking about climate crises and questions of water, which is what is driving my presentation, you can already see where I'm heading. Those territories are not going to be giving agency to political actors to address the problems, because the problems flow beyond the territories themselves. So, yeah. Is this going? It's frozen.
Can you see it here?
No, it's not changing. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, you got that. Okay. So, what I'm trying to do in this, use a case study. Sorry for the technical glitches. What I want to do in the series of presentation of slides that I'm going to share with you, which include some maps and different ways of seeing, I'm going to try to kind of have us think, not just describe the different imaginaries, not only of Mexico City, but in particular, as you'll see in a second, the imaginaries of what constitutes the city, which used to be called Gran Tenochtitlan, founded by the Aztecs, and I'll talk about that later. But I don't want to just throw out those descriptions. I want to have you think analytically about what are the political and underlying logics of the use of those descriptions, and how there's that dialectic between descriptions or representations used to justify a certain way of seeing or a certain form of power, but also in and of themselves foreclose what could be done or prefigure what will be done. So spatial imaginaries are agents in a way. They're, again, I don't want to say I'm just describing these maps, so I want you to keep that in mind. I'm going to be talking mostly about Mexico City metropolitan area. I'm including this map because a lot of you've come to urban planning or urban design or studying megalopolises. This is kind of an image that you'd expect to see in a PowerPoint presentation. You might also expect to see an image like this. I've probably used that image in many of my PowerPoints. You might think of an image like this of Mexico City. These are all contemporary things that urban planners are using to kind of, first of all, we can see that a common element in these slides is kind of buildings, houses, factories, etc. If you're lucky, you work like Laura and Frank, and I do occasionally on informality, you might see slides like this that kind of come down a little bit to the way a physical, so there's a freeway there, physical spaces are reconfigured. but everything, and depending on your politics, this might be there. So it's not always ordered views, visual views. It could be a visual view of disorder. But ultimately, none of those images have anything to do with water. And so you say, well, okay, you can't have everything in an image. But the first thing I want to underscore for those of you in the audience that don't know this, Mexico City is a city built on a lake. Mexico City was conquered many centuries ago, and because of its location in the center of the Valle de Mexico on a lake, there was a civilization there with a lot of power and a lot of resources. Now, Mexico City is different than Sao Paulo, than most other cities. I don't know that many cities that are cities built on a lake, but every city has water close to it. And you cannot, and there are scholars that write about this, the idea of concentrated territorial settlement implies livability, and you have to survive. So cities always have to be where water is. Then, of course, under capitalist expansion, with trade, the majority of early cities were on ports or on rivers. So it's very unusual to think about the history of urbanization in the history of cities without thinking them with respect to water. So those images I showed earlier had nothing to do with water, despite the fact that Mexico City is built on a lake. If we jumped ahead to other images, now this image coming from the press. This is not an image that is used by planners and policymakers very much, or people who are kind of trying to talk about governance or how to create a just sustainable, growing city, maybe balancing global capitalism. You don't see images like this, but this is this is an image of what Mexico City, a city on a lake, looks like many times of the year. So the other reason that I got interested in this project is, and I've been working on Mexico City most of my life, and this Humanities Urban Future, we were just there last year. 6 months ago, Mexico City was declared to be at zero water. And again, reflect back on all those images that are used to either propel or advertise Mexico City, or to kind of get people to come and invest in it, or to make decisions about where the new shopping mall will be. Do not talk about water. Yet on the everyday livability of Mexico City, the absence of water is the most crucial, scarcity and the biggest problem that everybody is facing. So I do want to underscore that I'm not saying that there's no imaginaries of water in Mexico City. This is, for those of you who've been there, this is a picture of a wonderful place that all the tourists go called Xochimilco. Where people go and have lunch and drink mezcal and hear music and go on the water. And those types of images are in the kind of tourist imaginary. But the reality is that this area where tourists go is highly contested between the ecology of this area is one of the few parts of Mexico City that still has water above the surface, where all the water hasn't been extracted from below the city. That's why the city is without water, because it no longer has access to water. It's constantly bringing water from far regions. This place still has water, and it's a site of major contestation between collective farmers who still produce, and it's in the bounds of the city, who still produce their livelihood through a form of agricultural production that is associated with chinampas. It's been a UNESCO historical site, etc. So there is some understanding of water, but really it is not part of the conversation about most of the livability. So the next 10 or so slides and the time that I have, what I want to do is talk about how did water become invisibilized in Mexico City? I mean, what is the historical and political logic of its invisibilization? So, and what I'm going to argue is that different regimes laying claim to Mexico Cities have seen water and its relationship to land differently. So what I'm doing in this research is trying to share or share the documentation of these different visions about the relationship of water to land through maps, archival documents, and artistic creations. And in addition to showing the historical, cultural, and political economic assumptions that privilege certain imaginaries over others, I argue that these different imaginaries have laid the groundwork for a range of built environmental interventions that have transformed Mexico's capital city into a megalopolis now declared to be at zero water. So this is essentially a story of how a city that was built on a lake, Gran Tenochtitlan, has grown and evolved into a megalopolis in denial of its historical and ecological roots. So the larger aim is to link that past to the present and to the future. So these are the 5. I will go quickly through that. And again, I have a paper and this is just a brief overview. But these are the 5 epochs that I want to share some of the imaginaries in those different forms, starting with the Aztec indigenous epoch of kind of Gran Tenochtitlan, moving to colonial rule, which lasted from 1500s on to the early 19th century. Then independence. Mexico was independent in 1820. Then there was a lot of contestation between 1820 and the Mexican Revolution in 1910. So there's a revolutionary rupture. And then kind of bring it up to the present. And there are different ways of visualizing or representing or imagining the relationship between land and water in each of these places. So this is a little bit of the timeline that I'm trying to go through very rapidly in this very sweeping presentation. So this, even though I do want to, this is a very classic painting of Gran Tenochtitlan that was actually created in 1964. But and I will come back to later about the moment at which an understanding that there was another civilization here and that water was treated differently does insert itself in the post-revolutionary period, which itself is politically interesting. But it doesn't, but still, at least this representation shows that Mexico City is indeed a city on a lake. However, the understandings and the representation of Mexico's in the kind of early Aztec indigenous period before the colonial rule was often made through artistic objects. So these are objects during Aztec time, representations and ceremonial objects and in these objects you would there are books about this, entire books about this, but the idea of Tenochtitlan, the city called Tenochtitlan, was connected to practices linked to an array of gods, of which Tláhuac, these are images of Tláhuac, who is the god of rain, pictured here on the left and the right, and he was a primary feature. And his sister, sometimes depicted as his wife, and I'm going to mispronounce it, Chalchichulucua, was also depicted in this. And it's interesting to me when I think about it, we'll come back to later, rain, that even though the city was on water, on a lake, the representation was about rain, which is connecting the water coming from the skies, where the gods exist, down to the lake and where people live. So guess what? Surprise, surprise. In 1524, when Cortez, the Spanish, arrives in Mexico City, this is the representation of the city that is first produced. Now, they did try in their archival, probably soldiers, their archivists who were soldiers, and when they tried to depict the Aztec city, there is a representation of water here. You notice also the city is bounded by a fortress there. It's like understood, and as we all know, water never stops at the boundaries. So at least the earlier image shows that there was water, and then there were volcanoes, and there's this kind of seamless ecology with a built-up center. The colonial come in, there is some recognition of water, but there's a clear boundary around it. Probably a lot of that was in fighting back against indigenous people that opposed colonial rule. But I want to just juxtapose that representation in that earlier period with an Aztec understanding, which is more about the Tenochtitlan and the water civilization, which involves relationships and structures of power and spirituality. More, it wasn't in a map, but it was more in visual representations. This is a portion of what is called the Codex Mendoza, and it was crafted by an Aztec artist in 1545. So the Spanish were still there when the Aztecs were there, but there were these like competing imaginaries of what Tenochtitlan was. So moving a little further, because I want to really bring this up to the present. So this map is called the Santa Cruz map. It was made in 1550 by Alonso de Santa Cruz. And you notice already, that other kind of gesture to water, the first one, that Cortez is already gone. This is 1550. Already there is an understanding, even though the green is supposed to be some kind of fluidity, you already start seeing a very different representation of connectivity, of throughways. Some of these are actually canals, some canals and throughways, but you start prefiguring what becomes a more formalized European style way of thinking about mapping and mapping the city. Here are two other images from 1628, and mapping by Juan Gomez de Transmote, who highlights an aqueduct channel supplying free water to the city. But in a way, when water starts getting recognized and discussed in these maps, it's through the hydraulic infrastructure that allows, first of all, the built up parts of the city to be serviced, and that then creates the growth of the city next. Then we move to a map, 1837, 200 years. So this is a little after independence. So colonial rule, eventually the Grito de Dolores, and in 1821, Mexico becomes independent. But then the question, and again, Mexico City was the dominant site of kind of what was a puted national state, that all of a sudden the issue of, okay, let's modernize our understanding, because we're in charge. And guess what? We want to create and build Mexico City, not necessarily the way the colonial rulers saw it, because again, they came for extracting minerals, gold, silver, mine, labor of Aztecs. They weren't really interested in building the city and creating a permanent civilization. When you get after 1820, you start the project of creating a new civilization, and then we start seeing these types of maps, again, following European ideas of what urbanization looks like. Here's another 1862 lithograph. And again, you start realizing, again, some of this is because of the perspective, how far away these maps are of larger urban territories, but you don't see water anywhere in these maps. Yeah, here's just another one, 1850, a photo of a similar site. Again, so it's about you see the historic center that probably has water all around it. And even if it's pushed back because they've got hydraulic infrastructure, that image I showed of water on those cars, that's this historic center right in the center of that is the place where the city emanated from. And there's no understanding of it in the maps. So one of the things I want to say, just to move to the 20th century, is come into what happened in the transition from independence to the revolution in 1910. Because in the Mexico City, after successfully throwing off colonial rule, went through a period of kind of recolonization. The French came in the 1860s, working with indigenous rulers, or I want to call them indigenous, working with elected Mexicans, Benito Juarez, etc. But also Porfirio Diaz introduced a dictatorship. He got elected in 1860 and stayed in power for 4 decades. But what he is known for, and I would like to think about some of his water engineering as part of the revolutionary struggle, was to introduce major water engineering projects to try to get rid of the water in downtown and try to build up Mexico City so it could be like another Paris or something like that. He built a lot of the Beaux-Arts buildings. The architecture in this period is very much oriented towards Europe. But in order to build the buildings that were going to be in Paris, which was kind of a reference point, you needed to get rid of water. You needed just land and not water. So he built what's called the drenaje profundo, a deep drainage system, which cost a lot of money, displaced a lot of people, but he was doing hydraulic infrastructure. So he recognized, again, water in the streets, but it wasn't in like the formal planning maps necessarily, but it was in part of the infrastructure. And this is just another mapping of what the deep drainage system looked like under the Porfiriato. So he understood that this was a problem beyond the city itself. But lo and behold, the revolution comes around, and I do want to, this is, I'm sorry, a little reference to a town in Hidalgo where I've done some work on water and water conflicts, but like that past drawing of the deep drainage system, which goes to states beyond that actually produced political pushback to the Porfiriato from these regions, because that water then was being channelized from and to regions that weren't necessarily supportive of the project of rebuilding Mexico City. And this region, Hidalgo, which is on the west side of the Mexico City, and then we have the state of Mexico on the right side, they were key actors in the Mexican Revolution. And part of the reason they were key actors is the photo on the right is of up on Hidalgo now. It's an agricultural center. But the photo on the left is a way of understanding how peasants in that region were transformed. Their livelihoods were hurt by the building of a deep drainage system that brought water and solved the problem of water in Mexico City. And they were a strong part of the revolutionary opposition to Porfirio Diaz. This is another map. I'm going to show you that there was a famous landscape architect. This is again in the Porfiriato, who was trying, Miguel Ángel de Quevedo, who studied with Ebenezer Howard, thought about garden city ideas in Mexico City. But this is again in that transition between having European ideas of what Mexico City would be and thinking about the negative implications for the regions, particularly peasants and agricultural workers in the regions of Mexico. So just another photo. I've got too many photos here. This is a photo of the revolutionary era, because I want to just say that the revolution was a revolution of advocates for revolutionary change from the regions, not from the center. The center really supported the Porfirio Diaz because they were the beneficiaries of every possible infrastructure and every imaginary about land as opposed to water. But if you think about the rest of Mexico, it was a coalition of workers and peasants brought a revolution, kind of a touted revolution in 1910, a leftist revolution it took a while. Several decades have struggled to kind of set its ideology firmly to the left, and there was back and forth in the first couple of years. But this is a map of 1927 from Carlos Contreras, the main urban planner for Mexico City, of what was going to be done in Mexico City after the revolution. So in the revolutionary period, they were struggling over these different imaginaries. One that would recognize the importance of kind of grabbing control and making the center and its economy work for the new revolutionary leadership. But also, this is again another map, but also another understanding of the ways in which this was killing the peasant and agrarian elements within the Mexico City region that were important political actors in the Mexican Revolution. And ultimately, many of the transformations, both in policy and in political regimes in Mexico, were struggles over how much they would preserve collective and ejido land and peasant land versus urbanized completely. And those were struggled over in the Mexican national political imaginary, but not so much in Mexico City. It was still driving forward with modernization. I've got to go really quickly, but here is one example of the tension. These are images from the late 1930s, 1938, which is when Lázaro Cárdenas was president, who really brought the kind of left peasant worker alliance together. And you see that there's some understanding that peasants live in the city. And your right image is the title of the peasants of Tláhuac. So, and there were, again, Xochimilco, there are agricultural peasants that are still working in Mexico City, but they didn't get into formal maps. They were only in like artistic representations. Okay, jumping quickly to the present in my last 5 minutes. I do want to say this is a picture of Diego Rivera designed a fountain for Tláhuac of a water pumping station in Chapultepec Park in Mexico City. So again, in the revolutionary period, some of the imaginative recognition of water and the Aztec past came through art, murals, and architectural like monumentality, but not in the maps of that were used for designing and building the city. So to the present. So now you've had decades of revolutionary rule, growing the city, some neoliberal era where you still have to continue to grow the city. And the problem of water, if anything, it's just looked for solutions to the water problem outside. Continue to build up the city and get water from outside. We transform water into land in Mexico City. But what does that do? It sinks the city. If we have landscape architecture, you know that the subsistence in Mexico City, and this is downtown Mexico City. So if you walk on city streets, you see the evidence of water and sinking and lack of water everywhere. So there was an effort in the late 60s by a very famous engineer, Nabor Carrillo, to kind of remap the ecological system to try to deal with the problems of sinking that were downtown. And this is an area in the south of the city where there was still some opportunity to rebalance water in the south of the city. But as we all know, as cities grow, and Mexico City is no exception, capital invests, well, look at the importance of building on land and showing that property and land is sacred as well as buildable on, starts in the center and moves to the regions. And that's why they started to try to solve the problem in the Mexico City region. And these are the kind of efforts that it would bring big hydraulic projects to kind of recover or keep lakes rather than letting them disappear. Keep them so you can keep the water table high enough that you won't be at zero water as you continue to build your city. So quickly, I'm just going to go, taking too long, but I do want to say that before we get to the present period, and I have like 4 or 5 slides of how new spatial imaginaries are emerging because of the failure of all these other spatial imaginaries. This is just an image of a big controversy that happened in the transition from the last neoliberal president of Mexico to its more left populist president, Andres Manuel López Obrador, who really modeled himself to Africanus, talked about indigeneity, talked about peasants, talked about old ways of thinking about the city. And he came in because there was a decision by his predecessor to build an airport in that one last part of Mexico City where Nabor Carrillo was designing, trying to save water, to build an airport right in the middle of of Lago Texcoco, the final last remaining lake that would be used to facilitate water capacity in Mexico City. So, I mean, the hubris, some might say, about reconstructing this area so it could be an airport that would support global city competitiveness for Mexico City was a project that divided the entire country. And when Mexico, this was the image of it. So, okay, some of the architects, and this is a very famous, I like him very much, Alberto Calach, but very famous architects were trying to mix water and like modern, global city capitalist competitiveness. But ultimately, when López Obrador became president, he canceled the airport project. And he canceled the airport project in part because the average people, this is how they were getting water. As these big hydraulic projects and big airports were happening, people were relying more and more on piped water in trucks, water coming from places outside of the city, not in the city itself. I just had to show this. This is an image, I believe, of Tláhuac. This is one of the rotoplasto. The people would store water on top of their houses because there's no water coming through the pipes from below the city. And as a consequence, López Obrador stopped the project in part to kind of recover the everyday reality of how people were making do when these big hydraulic projects were doing things. This is the ruins of the project. So to end, I just wanted to say that since the ending of the airport, this is like one of the runways that was abandoned. There have been efforts by landscape architects and activists to kind of embrace the fact that Mexico City is a city on a lake and try to build, this is again the airport project, but try to kind of redesign, readapt this lago Texcoco to become an ecological park, El Parque Ecológico Texcoco. And I land here, oh, it's not fast enough, but with questions about whether, now that we know all the failed paths, can we use imaginaries to think about something different, future, maybe even better? And I'm not going to say too much about, this is an image of the Parque Ecológico Lago de Texcoco, which has been criticized right and left for being too modernist, not, Aztec enough, shall we say. But what I think that where I want to end is that that's still dealing with the kind of horizontality of this lake. Now I'm throwing a new word in here, but it's still dealing with a kind of horizontal understanding of what is the relationship between water and land in Mexico City, but with a new imaginary that might have activities not only for people, but also build Aztec, water harvesting traditions into the park. It's still a park. It's not functioning for the whole city. But what that made me think about, because it's been highly criticized, is the need for all of us to think about what would be those new imaginaries that could solve a problem that's so deeply ingrained, that has to do with histories of water usage, but also histories of water usage that are beyond the city itself. Yet these are planners that are trying to make something work in the city itself. And that brings me to what I'm thinking about, new ways of thinking about time and space. So just to do it quickly, beyond the Cartesian logic of looking at the relationship just between land and water, and to start thinking in a three-dimensional terms. So because we're still constrained by old imaginaries of land and water, but as we all know, water has a big territoriality. So we need new regions to look at it, new spaces to look at. Water consumption across region, not only it goes across regions differently, it also is consumed in different temporalities in the region. For example, in a dry season and a wet season, even though the infrastructure is linking people, it's supposed to work the same way no matter whether, you're drawing it from a place that's in drought and you're having rain, it's the same infrastructure. Just more images of moving beyond, thinking about regionalism across political jurisdictions also is a new way of thinking about time and space, and embracing, and this is my last slide, what I'm calling volumetric thinking, building on the work of Stuart Eldred and others in geography who are actually trying to understand the plural or three-dimensionality of water and its relationship to land. And I just have a couple images that come from my colleagues and students at the GSD that are working with new representations to think volumetrically, but they're still separated. They're not all together. So there's, the typical section in a landscape architecture where you understand what's going above and around the water, but there's no political jurisdictions on this. And you know what? This is another way of looking at this more localized in a city, because the other is like a huge landscape without who lives there and what political jurisdictions. This is a project called the hydraulic district in Mexico City that's trying to do rainwater capturing, but moving across 3 dimensions, but close to the territory where people live. Just again, understanding that people need this water in different temporalities. Different classes and different neighborhoods need water in different temporalities, and trying to map the different temporalities of who uses water when and how. So, and that's just another map. I'll end with the questions that hopefully we can talk about later, but I want us to think we have some disciplines that are maybe thinking, volumetrically, but they haven't got people in them. Or if they've got people and they're not thinking about the political jurisdictions, or if they're thinking regionally, they're not thinking about under the ground in one particular site. So the challenge for us is not just to think in new temporalities and spatialities, but how do we bring, is there a way, and should we be bringing all those ways of imagining, seeing, thinking together in a single project? And is that the way of the future for thinking about environmental sustainability? So thanks. I'm sorry it took so long. Yeah. So
Thank you, Diane. Sorry?
do we do questions or friends?
Yes, I think there's a very short interval now before we hand over to Fraya for some time for questions and answers. And I really like it that you ended with questions, because that's actually an opportunity to turn it around, the Q&A, and maybe see if there are some answers in the public, in the auditorium, in the audience, on your questions. Just an idea. You can obviously also ask your own questions to Professor Davis. It's just up to you. So if there are answers, feel free, or questions back on the questions, or questions to the presentation. I have some myself, but definitely there's some interest here maybe. So, Kayo.
Thank you, Professor Diane. I'd like to ask you about the spatial imaginaries you are identifying. If you are going deeper in the temporalities of each spatial imaginary, considering, because it seems to me that the imaginaries that start to oppose land and water is based on this conception that's also part of the scientific development of mankind mastering nature. So creating this division that mankind is different from the rest of the nature in general, and we can now master it and model and shape it as we want. It doesn't seem to me that the point in the Aztec time, it seemed more like a dialogue between equal parts, or the same system where we are all part of the same world. And nowadays, at least in Brazil, some discussions considering this relationship with nature is bringing this idea back. We are all part of the same group, and we need to live in different terms, not trying to master it, because we haven't worked well so far. So is it present? Can you see it, or no?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a nice formulation of what was kind of implicit, which I hopefully came across, was the idea. So indigenous people are living with nature, and when the Western colonialists come, it's all about conquering nature, but it continues even in the revolutionary project. So, I mean, I think it's interesting, as we all know, that there's a lot of discussion about reintroducing indigenous practices in the contemporary era. So, and that's another reason I was interested in going that far back here, because there wasn't a way in which people lived and coexisted with water. The question becomes, another question for everybody, is as at what point, I don't want to say it's too late, because I don't want to be doomsdayer here, but at what point the historical evolution of that framing of conquering nature, and again, I would say with the deep drainage system that the Porfiriato introduced, that was a lot about health. Your next issue is on health, because that was the time, 1890s, 1910, everyone's worried about the plague and water being in cities and things like that. So conquering nature sometimes for human health, but at what point have we adopted that metaphor, that language of conquering nature so long that we are able to come back to living with nature in the same way? I think that's the challenge. And I'm hoping that by bringing disciplines, so landscape architects aren't necessarily always looking about how people work and get their jobs. They're looking at the ecology underneath. Why, maybe to get to see the possibilities of coexisting with nature, we have to bring those disciplines together in that vertical way. Because otherwise, if you're just looking at how people live in today and in space. And the other thing I want to say that I hope comes through, and that's for a whole nother discussion, maybe later we can talk about that. But it's not just the obsession with conquering nature, which there's long philosophical traditions, etc. What's central in the obsession with conquering water in the case of Mexico is to make land available for ownership, private ownership, because modern civilization is built on private property, which the Aztecs did not have private property. So let's not just look at this as kind of a scientific philosophical idea of conquering nature. What is the logic behind conquering nature? And what is the logic behind, I mean, we might even say, what is the logic behind innovation and sustainability? Is it really to generate sustainability, or is it to produce another way of accumulating? Last response, back to your question, have we created these urban landscapes built on private property and turned water into land, even if it's sinking, and people who live on top of it don't have water underneath? Is it too late to coexist with nature in the cities we built? And that raises the question, do we need to move to other territories or involve other territories for urbanization, settlement, or the future of humanity? Whether we have foreclosed options in cities like Mexico City.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Maybe that's all. Yeah, because we want to hear from Fraya, and then we can talk.
Let's see if there's a final question. If not, I think we'll move on. Thank you so much, Diane. This was a really inspiring talk. Really new things I learned about it, and I'm just thinking really about the animist way of looking at water and the new concept that we need, like the swamp city. So, Laura.
Okay. Wenn es noch Großkastanie ist. Thank you so much, Diane. That was a fantastic presentation, and I'm sure you have more questions, so please save them also for the discussion, and keep in mind Mexico City while we move on to São Paulo now. I know many of you have been working on São Paulo, also on issues of water, so I think there can be very interesting comparisons or insights also from looking at these two cities of the South, if you want so. So let me introduce now our second keynote speaker, Professor Fraya Frehse, who is a professor of sociology at the University of São Paulo, where she coordinates, and I know many of the representatives are here, the Center for Studies and Research on the Sociology of Space and Time, NEPSESCI. And she also coordinates the Global Center of Spatial Methods for Urban Sustainability, the famous SMUS, which is a collaboration with the university, the Technical University of Berlin and University of São Paulo, amongst many others. And within, I wanted to highlight this because it also connects to Fraya's presentation. Within the SMUS Center, Fraya has been developing one dimension which supports projects that seek to make a difference in professional practice for urban sustainability with the aid of spatial research methods. And over the past 4 years, these famous PEEPs, the Practical Empirical Implementation Projects, have contributed to this center, to this broader center's agenda of building a roadmap for future research agenda in urban sustainability regarding SDG 11. And this all has started with a pilot project led by Fraya from 2020 to 22, I guess, on the everyday specialities of homelessness for urban sustainability. And now this whole research dimension is in its last stage. And actually with the project, and also we have some members of the team here present in the audience, a project we are about to conclude and which I had the pleasure to coordinate with Fraya on evidentiary ecologies of health and healing in São Paulo's river lowlands and floodplains. So again, you can see how we moved from, let's say, sustainability issues, actors that are maybe invisibilized in sustainability debates, to also watery bodies of water in the city, watery issues. So Fraya, it's really a pleasure to welcome you on stage, to share with you also your insights from your research, which is connecting a lot questions of the body, of public space, of urbanization, in particular the relation to urban sustainability, questions of social inequality and homelessness and public space, intersectionality, time and space in sociology. So please, Fraya, join us on the stage.
So it's an immense pleasure for me to be here with you, to share this space with Diane Davis, with Laura Kemmer, and with Frank Müller, and also with you all who have been joining, inclusively joining our course on it's a postgraduate course on sustainability from urban sustainability, viewed from the south, and sociology. So the role of sociology, or the contributions of sociology to this kind of discussion about urban sustainability. So I'm very happy that many of you have been joining this course, are here with us today. So first of all, what I would like to do, and also to thank Laura and Frank for the invitation, is to, let me just see, because it's crazy. So what I would like, let me just find my, so what I would like to, I have the specific structure here, argumentative structure, which has to do with the specific issue I'm going to address, and also as spatial temporal lessons we take, where if you consider the title of my talk, what we may learn from homeless people about about sustainability in urban public spaces, and finally a conclusion. So the first thing is actually the issue of about the issue. My issue here has to do with the relationship between homelessness and the urban sustainability agenda, which, this has to be said first of all, this is a totally counterintuitive issue. So it's not adverse to conceive the possibility that homelessness might have any relationship, or as it were positive, in inverted commas, relationship with the urban sustainability agenda. If we consider, and we are going to, afterwards I'm going to address my empirical data. Laura has already mentioned or introduced where they stem from, but let me just tell you that there is another, the scholars who address the urban sustainability agenda of the UN 2030 sustainability agenda. There's almost an unanimous view that homelessness presents uncountable challenges and undeniable threats to this agenda. Homelessness is a phenomenon to be eliminated. These are usual terms that appear in the debate. Eradicated, prevented, ended, fought against. Yes, things slightly started to change in the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. In December 2021, the UN General Assembly created a set of resolutions that directly address homelessness as, I quote, a condition where a person or a household lacks safe habitable space, which may compromise their ability to enjoy social relations, and includes people living on the streets and other open spaces or in buildings not intended for human inhabitation. People living in temporary accommodation or shelters for people experiencing homelessness, and in accordance with national legislation may include, among others, people living in severely inadequate accommodation without security of tenure and access to basic services. So if we have a look at this kind of representation, we would say that, okay, things are slightly changing or have been slightly changing regardless the prevalence of homelessness or at least the existence of homelessness in our cities when viewed from the standpoint of the UN sustainability agenda. Nevertheless, we have the challenge, and this is what I would like to address here on this talk, the challenge of what we may learn from homeless people about sustainability in urban public spaces. And here I would like to address with you during the time I have here a threefold statement, which I conceive as kind of spatial temporal lessons, as it were, because I'm very concerned about the everyday life of homelessness, and hence the practical empirical implementation of this, the urban sustainability agenda in public spaces. But when I talk about the everyday life of homelessness regarding the sustainability agenda, I'm saying this because I am interested in the challenges for this agenda in the human narrow scale, as it were. That's why space and time, and my conception about everyday life has as a reference a really thoroughly concept and also ponderings about everyday life as a very specific level, as he says it, of social life, by means of which social transformations and hence history as such is possible or not, so those so-called historical possibilities or impossibilities related to social transformation, by considering that these transformations they have to take place in and around everyday life, and which means the specific way of socially producing space and time. This is what defines the possibility even of our other, for example, being here together. For example, here there is a time and space, a temporal and spatial dimension of this, which has to do with the way everyday life is produced and also produces social relations and also cities, for example. Yes, so I will address this in more details, but nevertheless, I would like to conceive, as you will see, I have a threefold statement, so three lessons, as it were. We are going, what homeless people may teach us about this sustainability in urban public spaces. We learn something, in my view, very, not often addressed dimension of the temporality of the UN sustainability agenda and the ideology which is implicit in this temporality. Also, second dimension, second lesson, what I call the situational temporality of sustainability, and the third dimension that we learn that multi-species sustainability is happening here and now, and it's our it's up to us to acknowledge it, to see it, to acknowledge it, and to actually even make politics and policies regarding this dimension. So these three dimensions, just for you to understand why I arrived at these lessons, it's because I actually have a specific methodological standpoint I've been developing over the years, which has to do a lot, whose references are, as weird as it seems at first sight. On the one hand, the kind of a communicative dimension of Irving Goffman's sociology of social interaction, yes, And on the other hand, actually, he lived there with sociology of everyday life and of the production of space and also of time related to everyday life. Yes, but the idea, now just to tell you a bit about the standpoint, the glasses I'm taking to have a look at this question I proposed, which is what we may learn from homeless people once we interact with them in the here and now of urban public spaces alongside, so we interact with them, verbally but also non-verbally, but all alongside observing and mapping their interactions with us, and also with third persons, and also with animals, with plants, with objects. So really a very an interaction sensitive gaze. This is what I'm proposing. Yes, and if we look at these interactions from this point of view, my proposal is that we really, and this is now I reach the object, the empirical object I've been addressing in the framework of the smooth action 4 projects, these practical empirical implementation projects of spatial methods, which have to do with this, what I call the everyday spatialities of many subjects, but especially in this case of homelessness. There is an L missing here. Of homelessness. What does this mean? I'm very interested, and I've been interested in the patterns implicit in the bodily arrangements of men, that men, women, and children make and made of their everyday, on a daily basis, of the public places where they dwell, while ascribing meanings to their own face-to-face interactions with people, with institutions, with objects, with animals and plants in these same public places. So which patterns, which kinds of spaces, but subjectively lived and perceived spaces come to the forefront, to the analytical forefront, once we have a look at the way, at the patterns, or at the spatialized patterns of interactions of these people with all of these other elements I mentioned, but by conceiving that these interactions are verbal and non-verbal. So this perspective claims for an ethnographic gaze, and I would just very quickly, very briefly try to justify here, offer you two aspects of why this may matter. From this, if we look at the homelessness, the relationship between homelessness and the UN agenda, from this point of view I just very briefly sketched here, we become able to identify within the condition, the so-called condition of homelessness, elements beyond the deficits and deficiencies that make up the aforementioned UN definition of homelessness. Homelessness thus becomes a specific pattern of bodily use of urban public spaces, which we define, the public spaces, defined as the most physically, legally, and informationally accessible places in the city, in cities such as streets and squares. So homelessness becomes concerns the regular physical permanence of human beings in streets, squares, and other public places for overnight stays, and thus for dwelling. We should not forget that the term to dwell comes from Middle Age English, dwellen, which is to physically delay, to live, to remain, to persist. Yes, this is I'm quoting here a reflection I made in another paper of mine, that nevertheless, what is important is we have that while poor people or poverty is not, homeless people are poor people, yes? poverty is not the same as poor people. Homelessness is not the same as homeless people. And we are here interested, or I am here very interested in what homeless people. So we know that homelessness, this phenomenon, the social spatial phenomenon of dwelling in streets and squares and public places. So staying there overnight, not just during daytime, as a practice. That this is a phenomenon which has many problems, also social problems involved in that, and so on, and as a specific way of producing urban space as well. It's a product of of present day urbanization, not only present day. It becomes a social spatial phenomenon over the last 50 years. And it becomes a global. It has from the early 21st century. It has become a global phenomenon as such. I'm distinguishing here as that homeless people have in the drama or amidst the drama that involves their presence there, they may teach us important lessons about urban sustainability. And the second, as it were, justification is that from this point of view, from this methodological point of view, my proposition is that if we take these interactions and especially from by people who really, by in this case homeless people, seriously, we are able, in the case of our cities, yes, to unfold a different urban history, which is an everyday history of the historical possibilities and impossibilities of urban sustainable public spaces in extremely socially unequal cities, such as the so-called southern cities, and especially in Latin America, which is the most socially unequal region in the globe. Public spaces, they confront pedestrians, all of us, and not only all of us, even homeless people and so on, with the crudest bodily and materially mediated facade of social inequality, the situational expressions and impressions of social inequality in face-to-face interactions between and around homeless people. Yes, so the advocacy here is a bit that each and every possibility of sustainable cities, and especially sustainability in public spaces, depends on coping with this public, most crude or crudest facet of social inequality in urban spaces, in cities, in nowadays cities, which is homelessness. Yes. So the empirical basis of my answer to this question, as I myself proposed, is really an amount, not only my longer trajectory regarding ethnographic research in public spaces in São Paulo, and also I did it in Mexico City and also in Lisbon, in Portugal, but more specifically far ethnographic research studies carried out by myself and by my student, by a student team of mine. Kakai was part of this group. There are other students here who have been joining this research team in São Paulo's historic downtown area, and two studies, but not only with this team, but also with this team. Two studies took place between November 2020 and December 2021, and included the recording of one ethnographic documentary short film. And I had a possibility of a third research experience with this research team in November, December 2021, and also the possibility of actually making a film, recording a film, another short film, a second short film, which was commissioned by the Museum of the Architecture Museum of the Technical University of Munich in 2021, they organized an exhibition about homelessness, architecture, and cities. Yes, and this exhibition started in Munich, and then it went to Hamburg, and then it has been around in Europe, and also went to Canada. And so, what I'm going to, my answer to the question I myself proposed here has to do with dwells a lot on research outcomes of these experiences. So on the one hand, this film, and the research experiences with my research team here in the framework of the Smooth pilot project. And also, just to say that, and some of the outcomes of the research outcomes have been published, and Caio and Giulia Patitucci, who is an architect here of the USP, of the architecture faculty, have been joining me in some of these publications, but also the group of colleagues in Berlin and colleagues all around the globe regarding the book we have just finished about the role of spatial methods and transdisciplinary research for urban sustainability. So just to offer you a bit of this kind of background, and then more than very quickly, I would like to really go onto the spatial temporal lessons, which I hope will nourish our discussion here, and also with Diane and with all of you. Yes. So the lessons I would like to mention here are 3 lessons. No? I will address them in a sequence now. The first dimension is this, what I call here the temporality of this sustainability agenda, which we become very conscious of once we address the issue of homelessness. Because as I told you before, if you look at first sight, there is nothing good for the agenda in homelessness. Inclusively, it appears to be something meant not. Poverty has to be eradicated. Homelessness is an evidence of extreme poverty, and so on. So, but these people are there. They are here. They are there. They are everywhere. They are. Even the homelessness is not only not only does it exist, but it is growing. And not only the biggest, largest cities of the world, but even smaller cities. So So we are homelessness makes us think. But how do we cope with? Is there any possibility of considering? And this is what we discussed in our group here with Caio and Giulia and so on. Is there any possibility of addressing contributions of homelessness? Homelessness does not contribute to the agenda, but homeless people perhaps. Homeless people are agents and people, and this is what have become of interest to us and made us consider that, for example, the Brundtland report, which lies at the bottom, as it were, of, and we had it in our course, of the sustainability agenda as such, the concept of sustainable development. It's defined as such. It's an attribute of individual collective initiative that further a future balanced subsistence of the planet's environmental, economic, and social resources for human and non-human generations to come. So the idea of urban sustainability and of sustainable development that grounds the sustainability agenda, there is the presupposed temporality that, first of all, that this is something to be attained in the future. So route towards that. So we are talking about a kind of a linear conception of time. So from the past to the future, there is a path to be followed. Yes, and then against this backdrop, the everyday life of the urban poor, among which those living in homelessness are one extreme expression, may at first sight appear as widely unsustainable, because scholarship on urban poverty has consistently emphasized the structural role of present time immediacy and improvisation in the everyday life of poor people in cities. At the same time, however, the same body of literature prolifically heightens the future-driven capacity of the poor to cope with the structural shocks that make up their everyday life. So the concepts of endurance by Abdul-Malik Simon, and prior to that, even here in Brazil, Maria Filomena Gregori, viração. So this ability of coping with the everyday life, yes, and of actually having all of this has to do with future-driven. It's not only to survive for the for the present, but there is also we cannot imagine or say, oh, we only want to survive now, but there is a future-driven. This ability does not. It speaks of time and of more than the present. Yes, so. And then what we see, that's why I'm saying it's ideology, is that if we don't take care, we will just see think that, oh, let's urban sustainability initiatives have to do with a pathway to the future, as if sustainability only lies in the future, and there was no possibility of contributing to it here and now. Yes. And people who are not in the need of the sustainability agenda as such, as the concept and so on of sustainability, but that make it happen in the here and now. And I'm saying this mainly considering our cities, Mexico City, and not only Latin America, but all the global south as such. People are living. We are coping with the everyday, and our cities and they have so many problems and difficulties, but they would not exist until nowadays if there were not people just practicing sustainability in the everyday. Yes, and what my interest lies in the contributions that homeless people may offer to this agenda, even if they don't do this in a very politically conscious way, saying, look, you know what, we are doing something for the urban sustainability agenda. Yes. So now I come to the second dimension, and this is why I wanted to show you a bit this situational temporality of sustainability I'm talking about. So this sustainability that happens here and now in everyday life, and people may not be writing dissertations on this issue. Yes, and this is why I would like to show you a little segment of my film. Yeah. Let me see whether I manage this now here. We have just, let me see. I'll go to the two. It's street architecture in COVID-19 São Paulo. I will forward it here. It's a story. The first story is about Junior. Yes, he lives in under the High Line, the São Paulo High Line, the Minhocão, and I would like to show you a detail when he tells me about the way he lives under this Minhocão in October 2021.
Sobre viver na rua é difícil. Nós não sabíamos que era aí.
Just some melhorias. I would like just to take out these. How do you take the YouTube and? Pronto. Só vou tirar isso porque you have the captions in English and in German, okay? So let me just do it again, sorry. Let's see.
Tô começando a andar agora. Sobreviver na rua é difícil. Nós não sabíamos que era rua. A vizinhança daqui compraram uma barraca pra mim. Coloquei ela aqui bonita, tal, grande. Eu fui no médico, quando eu voltei, a prefeitura que tem um serviço que eles falam que é o RAPA, que é para limpar o acesso às rodovias. Eles passaram aqui, destruíram minha barraca, levaram tudo.
Você fazia o que antes? Você e a Cecília?
Bem, a Cecília ela trabalha com reciclagem. Eu tenho vários tipos de profissão. Eu sou pedreiro, sou padeiro, sou eletricista. Nessa época, agora mesmo, estava fazendo pintura, porque ela estava abrindo um salão aqui atrás, né? Então eu estava fazendo a reforma desse ambiente.
Você foi pra escola?
Estudei muito, fiz também meu estudo, graças a Deus. Ensino médio, né? Depois disso, comecei a trabalhar, né? E aí, quando eles levaram tudo as minhas coisas aqui, eu entrei em desespero, falei pros pessoal, pelo menos ajudar eu com uma lona, que eu ia colocar por cima da cadeira a lona, ia montar alguma coisa, tipo, por cima da cadeira, assim, esticar, só para não tomar o vento frio. Aí eles foram, me compraram uma lona, aí o que acontece? Passou um carro com, não sei, um negócio de circo. Aí eu olhei, cara, aquilo ali, falei, poxa, cara. Aí eu olhei, falei, puta, um circo, né, mano? Aí eu, puta, falei, mas como? Fiquei imaginando, né? Porque tem que ter uma estrutura. Aí
Mas
quando
você queria um circo aqui?
Não, tipo assim, um circo assim, uma tenda, né, pra mim poder me cobrir, uma tenda de um circo. Falei, poxa, cara. Aí eu olhei pra cima, quando eu olhei pra cima, eu olhei e falei, onde que eu ia arrumar uma estrutura pra poder levantar ela, pra segurar, né? Quando eu olhei pra cima da ponte, vi uns ferrinhos, uns ganchos, uns pedaços da ponte, tá vendo? Tem uns pedacinhos ali, que é os retalhos da ponte. Aí eu olhei e falei, poxa, como que eu vou fazer, né, cara? Passo, arremessar lá em cima. Aí eu olhei, falei, pô, pedi pra eles comprar um rolo de fitilho pra mim. Já trabalhei com feira, eu sei que ele é muito resistente, porque a gente prendia caixas de fruta e ele é muito forte. Peguei as garrafinhas d'água e arremessei por cima do ferrinho e puxei a garrafinha, então ela prendeu.
Quanto
Tipo,
tempo demorou?
assim, e pra colocar todas, acho que foi uma meia hora. Aí que eu fiz, ó, a primeira lá em cima, eu já amarrei, fiz um laço no meio, subi ela pra cima. Estiquei ela, já ficou o topo, né? Certo? Ficou o topo. Dali, eu vim distribuindo os fitilhos, amarrando nas pontas.
Já foi no circo?
Já fui no circo também, já. Sim. Aí, amarrei as pontas. Falei, pô, o que eu vou prender na lona? Aí eu falei, puta, aí só que eu tô com a garrafinha na mão. Olhei pra tampinha. Puxa, essa tampinha vai dar certo. Coloquei no plástico, prendi. Virou um apoio, tá vendo? Foi aqui que eu prendi a tampinha, deu uma mozinha aqui. Travei o fitilho, ó. Pra vocês verem, ó. Travei o fitilho, ó. Travei ele. Sensacional, né? Travou. Aí eu falei, poxa, ficou bom, ficou resistente. Mas só que conforme você prende ele muito forte, o que acontece? Ele rasgava. Rasgava. Mas, poxa, o que eu vou fazer agora? Uma coisa que é mais resistente do que o plástico é o pano. Aí o que eu fiz? Coloquei um pano em volta. Aqui não quebra. E aqui ficou sustento.
Mas esses panos você pegou de onde?
Esses panos foi tudo que eu ganhei. Tudo que as pessoas aqui em volta me ajudaram. Os cobertores, tudo isso aqui tem uma história.
Yes. So, just to offer you a bit of this idea, né?
Of the statement about this part of this situational dimension of finding out sustainable solutions, as it were, in the fragmentary, totally here and now, very short temporality of living and spending a day on the street. Yeah? So, what would you say? Now, one could, at first sight, if seen from afar, we would say, "My God, this is only rubbish." Yeah? But is this rubbish? Yeah? What is rubbish? Yeah? What is so? All of this, all these dimensions, I'm interested in. And the last dimension I will have to mention now has to do with this, what I call the multi-species sustainability, yeah? Because, and which is something we addressed in our research regarding homeless people during COVID-19 in São Paulo, the spatialities of homelessness. And then I would just very briefly comment on two of these spatialities that came to the analytical forefront when we tried to address the patterns of interaction these people have and where, and also the spatialized patterns of interaction. So first of all, what really it not only strikes us, but people who do research and homeless people, is the amount of sorry? Peraí, desculpa. The role, this is a sketch by Junior, the role of especially dogs, but dogs and cats. Here in Brazil, dogs. And when I was in India and Mumbai, I found out that cats are crucial, more than dogs there, for homeless people. But this importance of public spaces being the daily work places for these people, and were they also, as we know, an important way of getting by economically has to do with what they call recycling. But all of this happens amidst affectionate interactions with animals and plants. The effective role of animals in everyday life of homeless people becomes evident, among others, in the struggles one of the homeless women, Julia, talked to, offered to her. She said she described her kitten as, "My little daughter Eva preferred to stay in the streets with the cat rather than move to a city shelter for women and families without the animal." And then we also have many other it's qualitative ethnographic researchers, but we have also this importance of affectionate relationships and of taking care and also growing and so on. Dogs, so for example, holding 2 lunch boxes and in his hands. One homeless man approached Rita, the homeless woman, Julia again, was speaking with in front of her tent, and Rita opened the boxes and placed them on the ground for the 4 dogs sleeping inside the tents to eat when they wake up. So this dimension of taking care of animals, which is happening here and now in the city, and not only in the city. And last but not least, the relationship with plants, the interactions with plants. And then we have an interesting story. This is a photo of one of these. The guy lived here, yes, and he had a garden around his tent. And analogous speciality regarding public spaces or spaces of effective interactions with, in this case, plants, stands out in our data regarding the affectionate interactions, particularly of homeless men with plants on sidewalks. And then in this case, one of the researchers, Edna Santos, he noticed green plants on both sides of the street. Some plants were in pots, others in cans. The plants lend a cozy atmosphere to the place and so on. And then when he talked to the homeless Martin, who grew these plants, he said that this is my little baby, the love of my life. He talked about, and the plants were talking to and so on. So we see here now that what is going on in a city. Now, where we yesterday we were working in the city center, and we saw that there was the public policy is almost abolishing each and every tree or sign of green. Green plants or trees in the sky, in the sidewalks of the city center, and at the same time we have this very subtle, very silent way of promoting sustainability, but without any kind of support from the government, and also in a very tiny way. And now I really finish my presentation by concluding and considering that the questions you posed, but I think we can leave, because there are 3 questions, Frank and Laura posed as both, and I think they could be used as a pretext for our discussion with Diane as well. Why should we examine the past to address sustainability? Why focus on invisibilized actors, in my case, and elements, in the case of Diane, to address the urban sustainability? And last, what can we learn about urban sustainability by means of these analysis? But I think we discuss this later. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Fantastic, dear Fraya. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, for the wonderful presentations, I should say. I think it gives us a lot of food for thought, and also Fraya has already mentioned the questions that we have been sharing, that we have been discussing already. We have been walking around the city center of São Paulo as well yesterday and started to talk about a few things. So please join us after the break to discuss further. But let's take the time for maybe one question. Is there any urgent, pressing question you want to ask specifically to Fraya now about her presentation, about her project, about her research? Then now would be the time. Or are you longing for the coffee? I think everybody is longing for the coffee, which is good because then we have more time actually to discuss. Ne? But please start thinking already about what you would like to discuss with us and also thinking across the two cities. My student assistants, and I want to thank them, they're outside, but I will thank them in the end as well. Carolina and Asri prepared for us a little coffee and sweets and salt. It's all vegan, so I think it will be okay for everyone. And we come together at 5:10 maybe, no? I would say in 15 minutes. Let's try. And then whatever we don't eat and drink, we do after. Okay? Welcome back. I hope you had a nice coffee break. And we will now start the final part of our symposium today, which is a discussion. So I'm super happy to have Fraya and Diane back on stage and also to have Frank Müller now moderating, introducing a few questions we shared with our two speakers in advance, just to warm up a little bit and to make you think also what you would like to bring into this discussion, how you would like to provoke maybe our two speakers to think together also across these two cities, no, of Mexico City and São Paulo, across the issues that we discussed in our seminar about debates on sustainability from the south, southern urbanisms, climate urbanisms, and so on and so forth. So please feel free to ask these questions, but also, of course, from your expertises in architecture and urban planning, in issues of water, please feel free to also interact. Okay, I will pass on the word to Frank to repeat the questions we were sharing with the speakers.
Yeah, okay. Did you put them on slide, or can you put them on slide? I mean, I don't have to read them then. So that's well, as you think that there are many puzzles that we can play now. How to connect homeless people and water and the two cities. I think the dialogue on and about these two cities and or from these two cities is already very inspiring and needs a lot. So I mean, one of the central questions we really had is who is becoming actively involved in thinking and practicing, or thinking about and practicing sustainability in the cities. Who and what? And here we really thought that this bringing together of agents, invisibilized agents or people, homeless people, and the invisibilized water create some interesting thoughts by themselves. So, and to what extent is water also an agent? And I'm thinking here about Diane's, let's say, the first epoch. She spoke about the pre-colonial, where maybe we have another ontology of what is living and what is not living, and what is basically animist, which is super interesting to think about what this means for our present and for the future, no? To what extent can we understand, or do we have to understand water's powers and forces, and how can we map them, and how do they have to inform our thinking about water infrastructures, for example? So water is so dynamic. Today we have a lack of water, tomorrow we have inundations, we have rain, and so cities need to really think against these extreme water events or rain weather events more generally, no? As we know, climate change is producing more extreme weather events and droughts and rainfall. So there's really this dynamic that water needs to be thought of as an entity, and which seems to be so much invisibilized all the time. So I think that is looking below ground in Diane's sense, and then also looking in the interstices of our cities, where actually people are developing sustainable solutions, obviously, as we saw in Fraya's film and heard from her talk, no? So what can we learn from them, understanding them as agents, and what can we learn from water, understanding water as agents? So that is the overlaying maybe provocation we are having, and that we want to hear your thoughts on, and that maybe can be you vice versa thinking about each other's work a little bit, no, in the sense. So the agency of the invisibilized actors, something like that, in thinking about sustainability. This is what we had in mind. But yeah, so
No, perhaps this is this question when you posed it. I was thinking of this, of it, by taking into consideration inclusively your talk about the ways of seeing, no, or ways of seeing water. And I think one of the first challenges we have is actually to question this idea of invisibilization, invisibilized or actors or elements from the standpoint of whom. Now, because they themselves exist, now, physically, culturally, socially in the city. No? But obviously, these people and the water, as Diane's talk wonderfully shows, no? It has been from time to time increasingly invisibilized in the maps and so on and so on. So I think one of the challenges I would say that we have, it's not just, for example, regarding homeless people. In São Paulo, we were discussing this with Caio and with a group of students in the framework of the research. Was you cannot ask these people to say, look, we are sustainable. Sustainability for us is. So they don't mobilize this lexicon, these words, these concepts, whatever life. But they offer their everyday life is full of sustainable solutions in inverted commas. No? But I think our challenge, so I would say that our challenge is not so much for us who are here in academia or thinking about these issues. I think the challenge is not so much to make them conscious of the fact that they are having sustainable solutions, but of invisibilizing these guys. Yeah? So I think this is the challenge of recognition, because of making politics with this and about this. I think this.
Well, maybe I'm just going to pick up on that point. I was thinking a lot about, I loved especially the video. I mean, I'll talk later, maybe in a different question, about the space and time question, because we also overlapped on that, although my understanding of space and time is much more macroscopic and yours is a little more microscopic. But in response to Frank's question about the agency of the invisibilized, it seems to me, and again, I'm a sociologist where I'm speaking in a kind of an action-oriented program, planning and design, is I could see the importance of confronting the invisibility and bringing together the people who refuse to see with those who are not seen. So the sense of and so I'm thinking from governance and planning, et cetera, the importance of bringing somebody, I can't remember the gentleman's name.
Junior.
Yeah, Junior. Or I was speaking to somebody about trash pickers that are very important to sustainability and have survived and kept cities alive forever before we had, big trash, machines, etc. Talk about recycling and sustainability, but to bring those people together who are invisibly creating sustainability with those actors and institutions that think they are producing sustainability, and you create a confrontation or a dialogue about that. So so that's a political project. But your example, I could see in it with the trash pickers maybe slightly differently than the homeless, only because there are other sets of understandings of what should be seen and what should not be seen in urban planning, and one is homelessness. Now, no elected official wants to recognize or see or allow or permit, even though it comes back with a vengeance. So to bring them together under the guise of sustainability creates a very difficult conversation about something else having to do with the city, which is housing and rights to housing. But that's exactly the point. You don't want to divorce sustainability from real estate development and housing construction and homeless. So I see great potential for some student activist project. What I love about the designs, because we're constantly coming up with like art projects to kind of throw that in your face or something. That needs to start. That conversation needs to start. And the last thing I would just say, it's not going to be easy problem solving, but it's to put on the agenda, just to repeat, the ways of not seeing and to transform at least the conversation about that, even if you can't completely transform the kind of normative values that people come to when they see or don't see things in the city.
Oh yeah, no, let me just jump on, because I want to make a comment, and then I want to open immediately for you to also ask questions. But I just found it so interesting how now again for me it became very apparent how this register of sustainability can also be mobilized by us in urban studies, be it urban sociology, urban planning, architecture, design, to also reframe our research subjects, in the case homelessness or scarcity, climate crisis, water scarcity or overflows even. So what I found super interesting is, you know, in sustainability, what is when you ask about invisibility or visibility, you have in sustainability debates, you have this strong logic of, for instance, the traces that humans leave, the carbon footprint, for instance, the ecological traces. And there's all kinds of discussions around this in natural sciences, the critical zones observatories. Latour has picked this up. So there is a move for evidencing, in a way, right? Which is very different from visualizing. So I find this is something we picked up in our project on evidentiary ecologies, which was exactly this argument of saying it's not just about evidencing through this logic of also the making visible in the, let's say, the more standard logics of, be it a map, a two-dimensional map, right? Be it a plan, be it this kind of classical ways of also in terms of numbers, quantifying, visualizing, and so on. But what is actually, how do these actors also make themselves evident, right? So how does actually Giulio, who is making street architecture, how is he also making visible his knowledge and his sustainable practice and sustainable everyday practice? And how is water, through his overflows and through his crossing boundaries, also provoking other imaginaries, right? So I think this is super, super fascinating. I want to just provoke this a little bit, but then I would really like to open the floor and also remind you that in addition to the question on invisibilization, visibilization, we have also been asking both our speakers to reflect on how the past particularly helps us to problematize contemporary urban sustainability politics and theories, and what kind of revisited understandings of urban sustainability these kinds of reflections afford, right? So you are invited to think with us. Diane has already invited you also, because I think both are very interested also in suggestions for, you know, how can we do this differently in terms of methods, in terms of research, in terms of concepts, and so on. So I will open the floor now for your questions. I will pass the mic to Carolina, maybe just to hand it over to some mic. Thank you so much. One sauce.
Hello, thank you for the lecture. I was thinking about Diana's answer to Kaya's question. and I was thinking about the idea of creating profitable spaces. That is the main problem, not about the struggle between the humans and the nature. I was thinking about this idea. And I was thinking, maybe can we state that invisibilization has to do with creating spaces? Can we state that invisibilization has its motivation, create profitable spaces, and then I was thinking like invisibilization of water and of homeless people, and I was thinking, which kind of profit is this, and could we apply the concept of spatial imaginaries to this idea of creating profitable spaces? Because if this is a concept we could apply to create another order of profit, because then we would go further and then we would create spaces in another kind of way, another kind of thinking. And this is
No, I would. Is there one? Oh yeah, okay. You start.
I would just, I don't know, just think of, I would like to add something perhaps for Diane to answer. I would also, I think that the two questions, because, which has to do with what struck me a bit about your maps and the idea of the spatial imaginary is it depends on who is not only the author, but the conditions of the production conditions of these spatial imaginaries. What I'm saying is, from what you showed us, it depends on these maps are used for what? Who created them? Which they were used for what? Why am I saying this? For example, regarding São Paulo, which was also until the 19th century, it was a city of rivers. Yeah. And even the European travels is something I forgot to tell you yesterday. The European travels arrived. There are many accounts of it. São Paulo is much nicer. It looks much more beautiful than Rio. Lots of travelers said that because it was a totally weird atmosphere. Because you were not at the coast and you had lots of water, so there were these floods. Yes, and everything changed. From the late 19th century, but mainly in the 20th century, and then this idea of the avenidas de fundo de vale, so these avenues that let's just channel all the rivers for them to be used as profitable space, as you also showed there, and in your talk you inclusively mentioned this idea of you use the idea, you say that. The struggles regarding, you said the politics of spatial. Well, anyway, I've written down here. But what I would like to say to know from you is, how do you see this in Mexico City? Because here in São Paulo, it was politics, but politics very strongly linked, obviously, to the idea of making profitable spaces for real estate, and so on, and then the circulation logics also, transport, mobility, and so on. But how was this in Mexico City? So which spatial imaginary was at the end of the day more spatially productive? Do you know? I think.
Well, I guess one of my answers to all these provocations, because you asked a general question, this is more specific, I want to deal with both, but it also gets maybe back to the first question up here about examining the past in order to problemize contemporary problems. I guess what I would say, which I hope does the specific and the universal answer, is to say that in the case of Mexico, and I understand that, well, every country and every city has its unique history. I like to underscore the uniqueness of the Mexican Revolution because it is one moment of a challenge from the Southern urbanisms, so the global South, to Western hegemonic domination about land, people, resources, and cities, right? But that is not to say that it's a totally different place in Mexico City now. So, because even a revolutionary government, which had different administrations over 100 years of time, is still participating in the process of, dare I say, modernization or economic growth, even if it's for political autonomy, right? So to me, this is the challenge for those of us study the global South, is how do you be both autonomous and affluent? And it's very hard to do both of those things if you're not somehow participating in a global capitalist economy, even if it's to turn it to your advantage. And that means, I know this is a bit wandering, getting back to your point, that means basically working with market logics. And market logics themselves are built on buying and selling the resources that make habitation, right? Even now, buying and selling water, or it didn't, in Mexico, I was mentioning to Fernando that what's interesting about Mexico is after the revolution, the nation claimed sovereignty over everything under the ground. That's oil and that's water. But then it went through its periods of neoliberalization, and then they privatized all those things and then nationalized. Anyway, what's my point here? That it's very hard to get out of that track. That's why I guess I don't know where you're coming from, but when I hear the word about profitable spaces, I want to think, okay, can we think of a different word to talk about the spaces that we want to create, fully acknowledging that that everybody, every territory, every government is constrained some way or another. That doesn't stop political projects, but you're constrained. So why am I rambling here? I'm just saying that, just to quickly, when you asked me about Mexico. So Mexico took different pathways, but it still was embedded in a way in which all the mapping, including, you saw the maps under the revolution, we're really talking about land and not water, because building the city was very important politically and at certain points for people itself. They still kept, and this is why I had the image of Xochimilco, there have been threads to keep the kind of water agrarian identity of parts of Mexico City that have persisted. It's not a total erasure of water along property lines, but it's problematic and it's under contestation. And so two things I'll end this with. One is, in getting back to even thinking about the agency in the project, we have to recognize it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a struggle, because there will never be total agreement. There will be contestation with it, especially if you're talking about, marketization of these resources. So maybe I'll just stop there. That's long enough. Yeah.
Just a comment about the last thing that Diane said. It reminded me of the text we read in the seminar from Edgar Peterse, who was criticizing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and also referring to the Brundtland report that Fraya also quoted, and was exactly questioning this almost Habermasian logic of the deliberative ideal behind these goals, and was exactly pointing to the conflictive, which has to be acknowledged as something that also he brought in from, let's say, also an African perspective, to say that there is a permanent conflict in leading out these goals. Just to keep us in the loop here. You want to add something, Freya?
No, yeah, but I think first.
Yeah.
Can I add one quick thing? Because I want to I want to go one step further about not criticize only the notion of profitability. I was thinking, though, your question made me think about language and about paradigms. So when I looked at this originally in the kind of built environmental world I live in, I've learned as a sociologist moving to a design school that like modernism, when I was a sociologist, nobody would use the word modern. Modernization was the social theory that you hated, you know, coming from the left. But I'm now in a world of built environment and modernity, and modernization is legitimate in that school. And I've learned not to critique it so much. But this seminar, this idea of sustainability gives us an opportunity to find a different word. Because even in my talking about maps, this, in response to your question about the importance of following modern ideas of what's private and public and what's social order, etc. Then there's a built environment, there's ordering the grid, which they tried to do in Mexico City. I mean, here it's very hard to do grid on mountains. But the point is, there are all these ideas imposed from other places, Western ideas about modernity, and they created the problems we're in, right? So I'm thinking, this is a challenge to all of you. What is the new language that we want to use to talk about moving forward to face the world we live in that might be something different than modernity? And the last thing, again, the profitability, I just wanted to throw out there, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, this emergent discourse about degrowth. Now, I think degrowth is a very problematic discourse when you're trying to work with like with people that are thinking that the way we buy ourselves out of this sustainability problem is to grow renewable energy, or etc. But what is the concept in between modernity and degrowth that could mobilize actors and institutions across the array, from citizens to governments, that could capture some of these questions? We need a framing, a discursive framing, which is a different thing than my presentation was completely about spatial imaginaries, but they have to be tied to discourse, I think. So sorry, but I wanted to respond to the idea of profit spaces.
Perfeito. Tem que ligar novamente. Vai receber. Não desligar mais.
Yes. Hi, I have a comment and a question. I thought really interesting in the video that Fraya showed us the image of this house that was hung up, and I think it's really, in my mind, it's a metaphor of sustainability, something that sustains itself. And I think this is really interesting. And when I heard Vanessa's question, I was thinking that this market logic, it's kind of it's against sustainability in the way that they don't want us to sustain ourselves, so we have to buy things to survive. So I think this is interesting. And I was thinking about how do we make visible those invisible relations. And I think you showed us some maps and some images. I think this is a way. And Fraya showed us a video, which is another way. But I was thinking, what else can we explore to capture those invisible practices and relations?
Do you want to say slides first? Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I would. Ayumi, just to make things a bit more complicated, based on what you are this interesting metaphor, this house, this hanged house as a metaphor of sustainability. But whether you believe it or not, and it's even in this video, this junior, he said at the end, it was very. I was very astonished, and we all were very astonished when he started saying, "I said, but when you get out of here, what are you going to what's going to happen?" No, my idea, he says, is to show other people how to do how to build this kind of house, So I would really suggest people to build them everywhere. So, but then, and then I come back, but then 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, everything was as it disappeared. So I think it's interesting to actually add something to your reflection. Né? Is that sustainability, né, as we saw here, and the whole concept that has to do with initiatives that do not interfere, that do not, they don't destroy the possibility of future generations and so on. Yeah? But the problem is that this has a temporality as well. No? And what the homeless people show us is that this temporality of sustainability is very fluid. It disappears. Yes, it's short term. No? So I think we have this challenge regarding the whole idea of sustainability because, for example, the waste collection, as it were, or recycling practices, as they like to say, they don't use the word rubbish or the germs, they say that they do recycling. Yeah? This is a practice that is immensely sustainable. It is invisibilized, but it depends on this very short-term temporality of throwing things out, and they themselves sell them, and it has to be sold. So at the end of the day, we are really facing a contradiction. So this whole discourse about sustainability obviously has also to do with the fluidity of everything, yeah? and the challenges of keeping life minimally as it is in such a context. But what I would like to add now to the whole discussion, and especially to this question about the past, yeah? And also to Laura's recalling Peter's criticism regarding the whole idea of sustainability is based on the concept of let's have a dialogue around it. I think the past plays a role in all of this for us to address the difficulty, the stereotypes, the prejudices regarding even these people, for example, because all what we are talking here about water, for example, or even homeless people, it looks very nice to our own because we like these issues and we believe in them and so on. But if you ask here, for example, even the current mayor, if you ask them, he was asked during the election, but what are you doing now about water? And this tunnel, they are building a tunnel again, and another tunnel here and so on. And then he said, no, but with our problems with floods and so on, we build these basins, the so-called piscinões. So this idea of there is a prejudice against water, or the whole issue of bexiga is this, né? To have the river, to unchanneled rivers. This is, my God, how horrible, you see? And the same about homeless people. If you, one of the problems regarding the formal or the institutionalized acknowledgement of homeless people working as space speakers. I don't know how it was in the US, but here in São Paulo, lots of them are homeless people, or almost homeless, you see? So and so what I'm saying is really there is an issue of prejudice, which are socially and historically produced prejudice regarding social inequality and so on and so on and so on. And I think this is also the role of the past in these analyses, for us to really be able to conceive which kind of relationships we are talking about, which is historically established ones. No?
Yeah, I'm thinking about your question about alternative imaginaries, and I mean, there's art, and there's activism that kind of mobilizes culture, history, and things like that. I think it's a challenge, but I think just recognizing that we want to engage with people with different representational measures or modes that make sense to them. and not everybody wants to see a film, or not everybody wants to look at a map, or not everybody can look at a photograph or something like that. So I totally, I mean, that could be something to think about more, especially across these disciplines. But I wanted to pick up on something else, because you just used the word fluidity, and that like set off bells in my mind, of course, because I'm studying water. But getting back to what I'm obsessed with, so I'm sorry to return to it, like, what is the new discourse? What is the new concept, a paradigm, whatever we want to call it, that we feel like we can hold on to something that it's not just like the future's unknown, or we don't know how to respond to the future. We know what we've been doing up till now is not working. It's creating the problems that, like, what do we do in the interstices, whether it's degrowth or whatever. And I think a lot of people are struggling with this, not the only one. But so you just used the word fluidity to talk about something else in the city. Maybe it was the homeless. And I'm thinking, okay, I just gave a presentation on water. If the fluidity is like the absolute ethos of everything because nothing is more fluid. Well, maybe that's just the definition. A lot of things are fluid. Water is super fluid, right? But what I've been thinking about recently in architecture, and it's not so recent, but there has been a move historically to think about temporality. This is going to bring the temporality, the flexible and not the fixed. So I'm thinking about fluidity and flexibility as opposed to fixed. So if we thought about some binaries with fluidity of, like, things are constantly shifting, and they shift in time, over time, as I've said, but also in 24 hours, or in your presentation, that so many problems we face have these multiple temporalities. The question then, the challenge to all you is, can we think about a concept that provides a future that's set but flexible? And why this links to that's maybe not the right formulation, but I think you guys know where I'm heading, because, again, getting back to accumulation, profit, most of and I've argued that it has to do with being able to identify this land, and that's yours, and you know where your investment is going to go. So if you're in the private sector, fixity, well, let's just say stability. You don't want precarity, you want stability in where your investment is going, and that's territorial often. Nobody wants to invest in something if it's going to disappear from floods or whatever, war, etc. So is there something in between that charts a pathway but is not based on fixity only? And the challenge was not to get the activists involved in that, because most people live a life of precarity and fluidity, and they have to live with that in that temporal shift. But the power, the structures of cities, nations, the global economy, they don't think that way. So what language allows a possibility to invest in an innovation and do something? It doesn't have just to be rich people, it can be all of us, that understands that it's maybe not be there forever. So that means it's a different way of thinking about investment and accumulation, and it's a different way of thinking about time, and it stands in contrast to modernity, which is kind of just increasing the same principle over time, fixing things on a certain logic. That's where we're at. If we take ecology seriously, that every place, every territory in the world is going to be in a sense of fluidity in some way or another, I believe. Some will be more extreme than others. And so that has to be part of the language. I don't know what that language is. You'll have to organize a seminar here to kind of spend 12 weeks to talk about what that political project should be.
Absolutely. We need to. And I was asking myself what sustainability is like from its wording, just wording, the ability to sustain what? A future, the present, whatever. But you can really play with words here maybe, but I think it's more than playing with words. I think it's not only the ability to sustain, but it's also the ability to pertain to something, to community, to a polity. It's also the ability to persist, but the ability to adapt to changing conditions. I think these are all words that are included and need to become strategies to be included into sustainability discourses, no? But thinking about this tension between progress, for me, modernity is co-equal with progress, no? And technical progress and solutionism and degrowth, which is also a form of solutionism. It goes into a better direction, I think, but still it's problematic, I think, because it's just not, doesn't create majorities, at least not in the day today. So I was thinking about your former colleague Neil Brunner, and the idea they had put on the leftist idea about cities for people and not for profit. No, not for profit. Cities for people and not for profit. And I thought, the elephant in this room also now today is a little bit, why don't we speak about multispecies as a word or more than human, or whatever? And why is it not cities not for people, not for profit, but for all the species? And then I think you have a way to look at different logics, the logics of plants and the logics of water and their temporalities, and think cities obviously as spaces for people, obviously, but also for other species, because only then we can produce cities that are livable and habitable for all. No, because if we just diminish all the plants, obviously we have a problem. So thinking maybe this could be this thinking about the ability of other species to sustain our future and to adapt our futures. That could be that would be very important to include into this sustainability discussion. No, it's a comment.
Yeah, I like that comment. But a lot of people won't like that comment, right? So, I mean, again, that's where the conflict is. But what I would just pick up on, because I really loved in your presentation when you were talking, or Junior was talking, and you also mentioned it about the cats and the dogs. I don't want to say it that way, because if you've heard Donald Trump, said something about eating the cats, but about non-human species, right? So I think that's a great idea, but like there's a big barrier to get the people with power and others to think about territory, which is a word I like, as providing the basis for, livability, habitability, pleasure, everything that we care about beyond just the built environment, even the human, to include the non-human. And the only I'm following up on this because one of the things that I mentioned in looking back at indigenous cultures and spirituality, I guess I'm just saying, if this is the part of the project, this is it's not just discourse. We need a new philosophy, right? And I think it's true that in the degrowth folks that we know, they're still kind of coming at it in a very solutionistic way. But we're really talking about a transformation of I hate the word values, but of kind of ontology, whatever, a transformation of what has meaning in everyday life. So if you want to move along that pathway, we need, and maybe that's where your question about other imaginaries, let's think about those other things that have to be part of the political project, which includes, and I know there are activist groups that think about this and really talk about preserving biodiversity and nature, etc. But it's not anywhere near the big cities that are engines of growth, really. So that's just a great comment that has to be part of the political project. And just to stop here, as is so obvious, I see this as a political project, not just an academic conversation. And that itself is a challenge. Like, who's going to start that and where and what are the networks across cities and within cities and across cities? Somebody has to be thinking about that.
Yeah, may I comment something? Because I was two things. First of them, I think, regarding this discussion here. I was, after getting to know India, last year. I was really wondering this idea of cities for a species. I said, my God, these are the Indian cities. Yeah, they have the cows are there. Don't touch the cows. The dogs are there. The cats are there. Yeah, but this does not mean that. And then I would also include not only multi-species but also the non-human. So the whole the gods, the amounts of gods. So we have actually. This does not solve anything, you see. I think it is complicated because even this idea of multi-species, yes. So we would say no. Then let the mosquitoes come. Let's see. So it's difficult, né? And the cats, the dogs, and so on. But né, with which. So it's a tricky cities for whom. I think this is a challenge for people. For multi-species, I think this is an immense challenge indeed. Where do we? And the second thing, Ayumi, just to pick up your second issue again, this how to represent alternatives, spatial imaginaries, how to represent them. I would say, and this is just to a bit come back to our course, and to the role of sociology and all of this. I think. The sociology, or science, but the social sciences particularly. I think, for example, Diane's presentation, she offered us the result, the outcome, will you correct me if I'm wrong, of a research. And based on that research, she actually came to specific spatial imaginaries that she systematized and presented here. Here, look, I have 5 periods of time, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I myself, in my presentation, 3 statements. The basis, research done. Do you see? And then these everyday spatialities I can show, and so on. So what I'm saying is that, and then I think this is a difference, because what we were talking about here is, let's use maps, let's use videos, but these are ways of representing, obviously, but to disseminate a knowledge that we produce here. So I would say, as a kind of advocacy for academia, as it were, or for this kind of discussion here at the university, is that even if obviously we can always and trigger artists to do, and to architects, urban designers, what Diane said here, the applied sciences, this idea of go on and try to make a project, as it were. But the basis is research. Do you see? So I think in our case, I think we are also led by this kind of discussion to discuss. For example, even myself, when I produced that film, I had lots of minutes and hours of film to search and to edit it in a way that it could convey my outcome, my analytical outcome of my contact with these people and so on. Yes? So I think this is important also to, if you are in the artistic work, this is what I always like to, for me, this is my point about this, the difference between, as it were, the social sciences and literature, applied sciences, and so on. And applied sciences, they also produce research. But if you have, for example, fiction, artistic works, they are crucial because due to their sensitivity, they propose perceptions of what is going on in the world. We do the same, but based on research, scientific research. It's not better, it's not worse, but we propose a question and offer an answer to it based on research. And artists, they propose questions, and this is the role. So, I think it's just the role of research in the middle of all of this.
Yes, fantastic. I think these are already very, very nice final statements. We have a question. I didn't want to cut the discussion because I think we should please take all of the questions. Yes, please, Fernando, ask your question.
So fast. I would like to talk about governance because I think we can't discuss water without the governance of this kind of research. We know that climate poses extremely complex challenges for us that can't be solved at the local level. Water, for example, energy, and so forth. So, how can I would like to ask Diane if you are researching this question because we know that water basin limits doesn't correspond to political borders, political limits. So we have a spatial problem concerning how to define the governance of climate challenges, climate issues.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. You probably can answer it better than I can. And I will be short because this is it's kind of an invitation to what I'm thinking about. So let me just say quickly that I'm involved in a project that's called New Territorialities of Governance for the Anthropocene. We do not have the answer. But what we are doing is trying to get this gets back to I would see it as a political project, but it gets back to research. So we're trying to look at different kind of sites where there are, I've used the concept transboundary conditions, where we know that a problem relating to climate, which mostly has to do with water, but not only water, spans the formal boundaries. And we're trying to do research to see what evidence thereof is of new arrangements, maybe coming from below, from citizens, it could be private sector too, that work across those boundaries to solve those problems. And to think about whether that can lay the pathway for other show that citizens themselves see this as important. Because in order for the government doesn't want to let go of its territory because that's where power and established, etc. But if we can show in the real world that these ecological questions or issues are inspiring individuals themselves to try alternative pathways, that maybe that could lay the research to do something different in the future. So personally, I think yours is the $1 million question. And a lot of people answered this on the global scale. There's so much discussion about COP, and here it's in Brazil. We just saw it's again the fight between the global north and the global south, and that's a big fight. But I'm so interested in whether we can break out of that by coming from below, from the territory, from the cities, from the neighborhoods up, that will put pressure on maybe the region first and then the nation later. Because if there's more innovation within a country, and I use the concept region just because I want to think about beyond the modernist jurisdictions that I laid out earlier. So that's my quick answer. Maybe we will learn. I think when we get more research on ways, I hate to say it, but success stories or ways that people come together. And this is where we, as sociologists, what imaginary ties people together, and what imaginative that is like, okay, we are worried about that flood in Asheville, North Carolina, because that, not only did it take the community to its knees, it changed production of agriculture, and all of a sudden rural people that never talk to urban people are coming together. They realize they share a future. And that's a research question, but then also you build on creating those spatial imaginaries, or those socio-spatial imaginaries, and see if you can, I hate to use the word institutionalized, I just talked about flexibility, is you can move those forward. Now, let me just say, again, I know we're going over, but I've done work on this in the case of Apan Hidalgo, that slide in Mexico. And one of the things that we looked at, and again, just to close it down with respect to this idea of fixity and fluidity, we looked at this in Mexico. There were 5 different aquifers that were sharing the same water, and there were problems of inequality, but only one aquifer was making decisions, so it hurt others. But also, if we think about the work I do on the US-Mexico border, the question becomes, if you come up with a new territoriality for governance, how do you make it, I don't want to use the word firm, how fixed should it be? Or how flexible should it be? And we're moving into a totally new world because in modernity, we didn't think about solutions that were that would change. But for example, in the U.S.-Mexico border, I found that it was easier to write treaties and then renegotiate treaties than it was to renegotiate to add a new, a new dictate in the Constitution, or like to kind of change the law. So there's a whole set of other questions about governance that would come once you find the examples of what's working. And those get us to where we are in the future. We are not living in the 19th century anymore. And we have to think not just about the new territorialities, but how are they going to be fixed? Maybe we're in a world where we can't have that kind of fixity. And then that raises the question, okay, maybe fix for 10 years, but not 100 years. So time comes in there too. Yeah, I'm just going on too far. But that's all the themes that you guys laid out for the seminar. So,
Okay. So the blame is on us, Frank. You want to have a question? Yes, please. Yes, why not?
Do you have the neck?
¿Qué pasa? Órale. Yeah.
In our course, well, even the title of the course had an hyphen, like it was, if I'm not mistaken, urban sustainability from the south and sociology. So my it's a kind of question and a provocation, considering the role of sociology in this discussion, because I have talked a lot with to Fraya about this topic. Here in Brazil, in particular, in these discussions on urban sustainability, it's really hard to find sociologists involved in propositions, in critics, and etc. It's a topic that's mainly hosted by architects, urban planners, and or engineers, geographers, or biologists, and etc. And I think part of the challenge we have in Brazil is to make it legitimate for sociologists to make a contribution in the debate. And part of this challenge is to show what we can offer that nobody else can offer to this discussion. And it's interesting because in the course we read texts by geographers, political scientists, I don't remember now, geographers, architects, and yours and Fraya's presentation today were the first from sociology, not coming from the global north. We read already also a text by Antonio Cândido, but this discussion on urban sustainability, your text was the first one from by a sociologist, and I would like to ask and think together about what's the role, based on everything we have discussed today, what's the role of sociology in this debate? Because if my impression is that in these challenges that the climate changes pose to us, to the global society in general, sociology is the most capable science in terms of showing us how embedded in the way societies organize themselves this problem is enrooted. So how I remember a Brazilian sociologist, José Martins, saying that poverty, it's a social problem. It's not an economic problem. It's a social problem created by economic organization. So the provocation is climate change a social environmental problem, not an economic one, as it has been treated by these mainstream way of thinking about the topic.
Very good. You know, I'm so happy to hear that question because I still like wear my sociology badge, but I'm in a design school, so you know. But well, I hope this is not too cheesy of an answer. I don't know how that's going to get translated into Portuguese, but I do want to say, and that I've always one reason I studied sociology is I would like it's not my phrase, but often in the social sciences, sociology has been understood as the queen of the social sciences. Maybe we should say king. I don't know. I don't want to get into the gender conversation. But because if you think about the classic works, we can talk about Weber, we can talk about Marx, we can talk about Simmel, that every major thing, because it's about society. And if you're talking about society, you have to talk about capital, markets, psychology. I mean, it grew out of psychology, as we all know, that it wasn't just that you understand what's in people's heads. What's in people's heads is a consequence of who you relate to in everyday life. But it wasn't just that kind of, I don't want to call it micro-socialism, but symbolic interactions we were talking about. We talked about political institutions. We talked about how capitalism works. You learned all of those things. When you're coming to think about climate change, modernization, even if we criticize that concept, the discipline of urban sociology, which I come from, was an attempt to try to make sense of territorial shifts that come with economic modernization. So from the get-go, sociology has spoken to all these other disciplines. And I think that's, and I do want to say that in a design school, we are transdisciplinary. And I'm happy to add architects and landscape architects to that conversation, because sociologists did not actually look at the kind of materiality of building, etc. But everything in sociology as a discipline has addressed all the problems, almost all, 90%, of what are on the table now. And the last thing, and we'll hear from Fraya too, but the last thing I would just say, I couldn't help but think, given what we've talked about in this conversation today, is the famous book by C. Wright Mills, The Sociological Imagination. And when I was the chair of the sociology department of the New School, we did we rethought the sociological imagination, revisited. We had David Harvey, and we had, you know, everybody. We had Zygmunt Bauman and Ulrich Beck. I mean, we had everybody that came to talk about the new, it was called, and if anybody wants it, I can send you the link to a edited volume, The New Sociological Imagination. But the point is that Mills said what sociology is how people understand who they are in the world or in society. This comes back to what we're looking for in new discourse, whether it's spirituality or not, how you situate individuals in the larger context. And that's, of course, mediated by collective action and groups in your neighborhood and space, etc. So that's why sociology is the way to go.
My God, I'm kidding you. I'm laughing. Sorry, I'm laughing here because this is exactly if you remember the first lesson, it was exactly, I started exactly with this point. Do you remember? No? The network of relations and so on, rightness, all of it. So you made my life easier, Diane, because you just gave the evidence, the scientific evidence from the US. What we are teaching here is not bullshit, yes? Exactly. No, I'm very happy, really, because it's exactly what we've been discussing. No? And I think I would say to your, as an answer, a quick answer, Kai, to your question, I would say, really, from all of this, what we've been discussing here, no? What becomes clear, these are precisely the questions that Frank and Laura proposed. Who, why, how? So, who means people, and it's people that are related to one another, institutions, governance. So, we are talking about the network of relationships and interactions mediated by representations. This is exactly our Florestan Fernandes, the old Brazilian sociologist. So, I think this is the role we play. When Diane asks for which concept, which discourse, based on all these elements here we've been discussing here. Ne? It's not just a concept, an idea without, to use Marx, and then we are back to sociology, an idea just floating in the air. It is a rooted, socially, historically rooted, spatially and temporally rooted idea, a concept.
Totally.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Frank, do you have anything to add? No? Okay, then I'm only left with saying thank you from my heart, because I think this discussion was incredibly enriching, as the cherry on the cake, how we say in Portuguese, a cereja do bolo. Now, really, I want to thank both Diane and Fraya for their keynotes, because I think that was really, for me, very important also from this proposal to really revisit, not just as a metaphor, but really think hard about, so does it mean to call a chair with this proposal of interdisciplinary sustainability research at the Faculty for Social Sciences and Humanities? What can we contribute? Exactly this question, right? So, and also, we have been discussing a lot about this question of the perspective of the South, and we have been, I think, come to a very interesting also, not conclusion, because I think the debate is very open-ended, but at least to this insight that it's much more than geographic North and South, and that we want to look at these interstices, that we want to look at these unruly elements, that we want to look at these dynamics, fluidities also of visibility, invisibility, of governance, and so on. So I think this has really brought almost on the sediments of this debate, has brought a very interesting aspect also to the discussion. But I just wanted to say thank you to Frank for the moderation, for the great questions. It was very interesting also to exchange with all of you prior to this and find these common concerns. And that thank you very much for the great questions, because I think each of you has brought in a very important aspect also to this debate. So I hope we continue the discussion. As I said in the beginning, we have a final event of this series of revisiting Martius, which will, I think, speak a little bit to what Diane has also been emphasizing a lot, namely, what new vocabularies, what is actually, so what to make of all these multi-species, planetary ideas that are now floating around, so to say. So how can we bring this debate further, grounded in research? And I really hope that all of you will follow this, because we are now also posting results on Instagram and on YouTube, so you can still follow this debate. Some of you will still write their papers and continue their research on these issues. And then in March next year, we have the final event of this series, and I hope to see some faces there again. Okay, so thank you so much. It was immense pleasure to have you here. And I said to all of you, we are going now for the most pleasurable part, which will be dinner, and you are all very welcome to join us in Canto Maddalena. Okay? Thank you.